If you marry him, then you would go with him. He is trying to re-establish his claim in Eothwic, as is another Norstein, Sitriger of Dublin. Anlaf is a good man, so Constantine says, and he would never say so unless he is sure. You are his daughter, Edra, the daughter he never had, more a child of his than ever Ildub or Selark. And then suddenly, Edra did a very un-Edra-like thing. She threw her arms around Osrith's neck and hugged her, hard and intensely, like she used to do when she was a tiny child. "Oh, Mater, I love you so," she declared. "That you saved my life, that you brought me here. I have never had an unhappy day, not really." Osrith laughed lightly into her hair. "Not when you tried to jump into the Forth and swim alongside the boat to Kuldis, and Sainid fished you out. You were having a pretty bad day screaming and cursing at him with all the new swear words the fisher boys had taught you." She felt Edra cry giggle into her shoulder. "And what about the day you came back in the middle of the night because you and Ildub had walked 10 miles west instead of east and you had lost a shoe in the mud?" Edra laughed again, and looked Osrith in the face. "Yes, it will all change now." And she looked at Osrith's stomach. "And you will have a new child to care for." "I will need your help, Edra," Osrith said, "and you are always my daughter, and I will always be here for you when you need me. You were mine first." And she saw the girl's face lit up with the idea of a child, and put a hand to Osrith's stomach. "I will be in the birthing room with you, Mater, I will never leave your side." "No," Osrith said, "not that." "I did not mean that," she insisted, because Osrith would be out of control then, and would not be able to direct Edra, or protect her. "You will learn to hold your brother or sister, dress them, how to tie them out of the way dash." "What?" Edra looked at Osrith with a frown. "Swaddle them, and bundle them up, so they learn to hold up their heads and grow straight. Although I never did that with you, I wouldn't let you out of my arms for the first 6 months of your life. You nursed from me, I changed you. I was there when you explored. You slept beside me." Edra was looking at Osrith in wonder, and then smiled. "Elasate has said I can help," Edra told her. "And Elasate has birthed hundreds of babies, so she has said. You don't need to protect me, Mater, I can help you." And Osrith looked at Edra, really saw her then, nearly old enough to marry, no longer a child. "Since when did I get such a grown-up girl on my hands?" Osrith asked, and this time pulled Edra to her. "And, as to Anlaf, you do not have to marry him, even if Constantine says he is a good man. In fact, do not decide until the time. I may not even be here if I am going away. Ate has never decided to send you to do something for you now, when you are with child." Edra asked, aghast. "Why not?" Osrith replied. "It is not like I am going to give birth tomorrow. It takes many months until the baby is ready." 9 cycles of the moon, Edra told her. "How many cycles has it been now?" 4, Osrith told her. And that had been her limit. Osrith had never been pregnant for longer than 4 months. It worried her, the loss of independence, the loss of her freedoms and, a reasonable risk of loss of her life. Osrith wrenched her mind to Edra as a thought crossed her mind and she looked at Edra. "Has Constantine told Ildub that he must not see you beginning immediately?" And she watched her daughter's beautiful face light up like a day in high summer. Edra shook her head, then slowly got to her feet, realization filling her mind. "Enjoy yourselves," Osrith called, then added, "and don't get into too much bother, or Constantine will be wanting to speak to me about it." From down the corridor, which led to the stables, she heard her daughter call, "We won't, Mater, we won't." 88,888,888. Osrith returned to the armory, which was deserted, to consider the plan before them, until hunger crept upon her like a thief to steal her energy and she made her way in the dusk light across the stableyard to the kitchen. From beyond the kitchen garden wall Osrith heard Edra laughing, but trying not to laugh, and Ildub talking to her, which was making her laugh all the more. Glimri was making a stew for supper, and told her she could go to join Constantine and the lords in the hall. But Osrith shook her head, and told him she was too tired to be sociable. So he took her by the hand to the little annex beyond the kitchen and got her to sit down with her wooden bowl full of broth, before leaving and returning with bread, and some blankets. He had remembered her, then, Osrith thought, despite what must be very advanced years, and she marveled that Glymery could still do his job with crinkled eyes and a bent back. He had remembered where she used to sleep, too, and that she did not take meals with the royalty. And Osrith did sleep, and would probably have slept until morning had not an owl hooting in the blackness had made her stir. She got up, and found in the darkness a candle was still lighted within a lanthorn at the very center of the table. Fresh drawn water was in a jug beside it, along with more food, some which looked suspiciously like portions which could be taken on a journey, and Osrith's heart melted as she guessed the only person who would have thought of this, when she had not. Osrith had a lot to thank Sained for. A drink, and a walk made Osrith feel better. She knew she should speak to Angus, if he were the Constantine's Mormor for Strathclyde. Osrith knew little about Diffenwell, other than what Constantine had told her, that he was a petulant brat, or words to that effect. Yet, they were travelling to his kingdom to sail south. There must be a reason for that particular arrangement, rather than just riding south. It was quicker, of course, and would allow them to arrive to Debutbath in a few days rather than several weeks, and meant no kingdoms would be crossed. But was that all? Knowing Constantine as she did, Osrith supposed not. Her walk took her past the throne room where 2 guards were standing, protecting the door. Light could be seen around the door frame, so Constantine must be meeting with lords, she gathered. Then, the door opened. Instinctively, Osrith pressed her back to the cold stone of the fortress wall, as Constantine stepped out, and then, behind him, Angus. Both men nodded to one another. Osrith could just see, into the dimly lit room, another figure. Eswe, perhaps. But her eye was drawn back to Constantine, and, when he turned and walked past her without recognition, Osrith waited, and then followed Angus. Feel him she knew, from Glenorchy. He was loyal to Constantine, so Osrith had a lot of faith that she could trust him, doing as she would be the king's business. But Angus, she did not remember him, and barely knew the connection between him and the crown of Strathclyde. But, he was Mormor of that land. Constantine must trust him enough to give him the role of overseer of his laws, which, if she were Diffenwell, would anger her. Diffenwell was Eochaid's son, and Eochaid, son of the last Briton in the throne of Strathclyde, had claimed Dunnottar, a failed claim, even with the help of the wily Greogair. As the Britons in the Heptarchy disdained the Saxons and the Angles, the Britons, the Cymric nations, Strathclyde, Pitland, although this kingdom was now obsolete, felt the same about the Gaels. It did not matter that Sained Mac Alpin married a Briton, and overthrew Dresd. It did not matter that his descendants had held the territory and held it further against the Norse. To many Cymric the Gaels were pirates from over the sea who took their land, and still held it, and now made their authority over it. And from the few words Eswe had given to her, Diffenwell felt much the same, despite his father, Eochaid's own mother being Mac Alpin's own daughter. Diffenwell was as much Gael as Constantine was Pict. So she wanted to get the lie of the land. Heritage apart, what did Diffenwell want? Why were they going via Glashcut to take a boat to Debutbath and to Highwell? There was more than the idea of easy passage to be considered here. Finan had once said that Tutid had remarked of King Alfred that, the bastard thinks. Therein the same epithet could be given to Constantine, for he was equally cunning, equally head-smart as the former king of the West Saxons. Osrith caught up with Angus as he got to a door that looked to have a bed behind it. She waited until the man, broad, and at least a head higher than her, turned to close the door. He did not start at her appearance behind him, but narrowed his eyes. "I am Osrith," she began, and the man straightened up in the door frame and peered down at her. "Yes, Angus, I know who you are. We have met before. When I stood before Constantine, this morning," Osrith continued. "When you stood beside Domhnall's bastard of a Gaelish cousin outside the stable yard at Glenorchy in only your slip, and ran when a load of drunk Cymry chased after ye both." But Osrith shook her head. "You must be mistaken. I have never owned a slip." Angus looked at her again, then drew a hand to his head. "Oh, now, wait. Maybe it was when ye were up in the stable loft giving yon bastard a good scene to." Osrith rarely blushed, but she could feel the warmth spreading across her neck and face. Ah yes, everyone kenned what he had both been up to. Very the next morning, was Prince Constantine. Angus chuckled. And then Yer left, sailed off somewhere, with others of Domhnall's men, and that bastard Griocare. He looked down at her. When Osrith said nothing, Angus glanced at her, and then away for a moment, seeing her pink face. I am sorry for that, he said, as silence fell between them. I meant no offense. None taken. Osrith shrugged. Men hump, and brag about it to anyone who will listen. Why should women not hump and enjoy it? Angus said nothing for a few moments, then breathed in sharply, and gave a brief nod. Except there are more risks for women, she added, touching her stomach lightly, then folded her arms and gave Angus a steely look. And you are back. Constantine says you are to be trusted. He said the same thing about you, Osrith embroidered. He hadn't, in so many words. But, Osrith felt safe in the assumption that, if Constantine wanted her to go with 3 warriors to Glashku, that she could at least trust the basic premise that they were loyal to him. If that is the case, then it is the most generous thing he has ever said about me in his life, Angus conceded. What is it you want, Bean? Osrith told him. And I am not a woman, I am a warrior. Angus threw back his head and laughed. Not looking like that you're not, Angus chortled, looking at her rounded stomach. See you have had your fun with Constantine again? But Osrith folded her arms. He is not the father of this child, she retorted. But Angus's face did not move from the triumphant grin on it. Only you can say, I suppose, he shrugged. So what is it you want from me? Information, Osrith said, baldly. Angus held open the door, and grinned an opportunist's grin at her. She folded her arms again. Tomorrow, before we leave, I need to know about King Diffenwell, and the true reason we are going to Glashku. You don't need to wait until the morning for that, Angus replied, still holding the door open to invitation. We are going so we can get fast to Hywel Dda of the Wellies, and have you deliver a message to him. But Osrith shook her head, feeling the ground move beneath her feet. Keep it together, she warned herself. You are not a fading, knocked-up kitchen maid. But why Glashku? We could go southeast, to Caerliguilid, or further down, into Cumbraland. Diffenwell owns Tuamont, does he not? You know a great deal, Angus conceded. So let me give you a bit of advice. No, let me give you a bit of advice. Osrith shot back. I may be younger than you, I may be a woman, but I have led men across battlefields, I have stood in shield walls, I have killed Norse and Danes, and 1 or 2 Saxons. I stood beside Domhnall when he killed Ivar. Angus finished for her. Osrith listened, and ran his words through her head. But they were not mocking her. Angus was repeating what he thought was fact, and perhaps betraying a little respect into the words. I was 12. The Norseman was about to kill Domhnall. I just did what I could, and then Ivar fell. I don't remember much. Few remember battles, Angus replied. Those who claim to have never handled spear or axe or chain or sword. He glanced down to Osrith's hip. I remember you had a sword, not that one, I do not think. Osrith shook her head as Angus continued, remembering Fed's sword. I was there. I fought before these very gates. He looked down the passageway where, at the end, the great gates of Dunnottar were locked. Now it was night, inner gates, which led across to the outer rampart gates. Just out there, Osrith remembered, and how it felt like it could have been yesterday. Constantine was saw you took his place, Angus added, still supporting his chamber door at the top with his huge hand. He talks about it, he jokes about it. Angus looked to her. When he is like that, you know, when he makes light of a situation, well, you know he is feeling sorry for himself. It was not my intention to make him feel ashamed, Osrith admitted. I fought, because 1 more warrior had meant a chance of 1 less Northman, and he would not put on his battle armor. I wanted to do something for him that I knew I could do. And Angus said nothing for a moment, just stared at her. You have my ear, he told her. Please, ask what you will. I am Sorry if I treated you badly. You did not. Few expect a female warrior. It unsettles them. You get the advantage for a moment. Osrith nodded. Come, Angus invited again, his demeanor much different to the leering man who she had first encountered. And this time, Osrith did pass the threshold, and found a chair near a case on which to sit. Angus did not sit, but stood before her. My lady, who did once call Bibbenberg her home, he hypothesized. And he was right too. But Osrith shook her head. No more. Not since I was driven from it to here, to where I was given a home, with king, and his kin, and the servants who were always kind to me, even though I was a bastard say. But it was Angus's turn to shake his head this time. Knew very early on whence you came, he told Osrith. But you were lost, and vulnerable. Therefore valuable, Osrith interjected. Aye, Angus conceded. Valuable trade asset. But, bring you up in the Gaelish way, and more likely would you be willing to go to whatever marriage had been designed for you, than sell you back to Elfric for pennies. Then, glad I am for speculation on my own life, Osrith concluded, trying not to let the flavor of bitterness enter her tone. But the gamble did not pay off. I am unmarried, and lived for many years in Wessex. And nor will I ever marry, Osrith repeated in her head, the same words, the same phrase, since long ago. She meant it, even if she had agreed to a match with whoever Constantine meant when he said, his kin. From where you fled, and sought refuge in the place you thought of as home. I say that was successful. You are a Gael in your heart, not a Saxon. Angus was rubbing his chin. Not even a Briton. My mother was a Briton, Osrith replied. Dear Jitha, Angus replied. Or, should I say, Wythelth, last Cymric princess of the Hen Ogledd. And Osrith found, as she stared at the man, she was gripping the chair, her joints feeling strain as she held it. And you are her only child, Angus continued, as he looked at Osrith's face, with intense curiosity. No, Jitha had another. My uncle forced her to marriage, my brother Wihir who holds Bibbenberg, in Northumbria. The words came from her mouth, but Osrith's mind was racing, and she did not see the look on Angus's face. He did not know that a second heir lived. Osrith, however, was thinking of the last memory she had of Jitha, black-haired, pale face, lined, careworn, but always smiling at Osrith. She had sat in the throne room of Bibbenberg cradling her stomach, as Osrith cradled her own, but Jitha, Gwythelth of Rust, was more term, and she had gone into confinement with nuns from Street Abs coming to tend her, and had come out wrapped in a shroud. Wihir, who Elfric had named, Utad, to fit in with the inheritance of Bibbenberg, in the arms of a wet nurse. Osrith had had no one to turn to, no one's arms into which she could bury her head. Bicor had gone, there were no other women, and Osrith had crept to the top of the chapel and watched her uncle's proceedings from there, the burial of her mother, the baptism of her infant brother. Perhaps that was why she was an unfeeling bitch who felt little when she fought, except for getting the job done. You knew my mother? The words slipped from Osrith's mouth as she looked at Angus, who stopped pacing and took a chair next to Osrith, still looking at her face. Yes, he told her, resting an elbow in his knee. Yes, I knew her. She was, well, much like you. The Briton part of you. They said Eochaid's father, Run, was the last Briton king of Strathclyde. He married MacAlpin's daughter, who was Eochaid's mother. But your mother was Run's sister, much younger than he was. Gwythelth grew up with Eochaid, inseparable. They were aunt and nephew, more like brother and sister. Angus shook his head. But she was sent very young, as a wife to the Lord of Bibbenberg, for his own wife had died in childbirth. Nearly broke Eochaid's heart. And I remember her waving ... as the carriage went away ... I loved your mother, so very much, Angus confessed, looking away. How she was pleased to be carrying on the tradition of princesses and Bernician Saxon princes. Like Oswy and Rhianmulth, Osrith whispered. Angus stepped towards her, and lowered his brow. Rhianmulth, he echoed. Yes, yes, he declared, his reply booming around the walls. Daughter of the son of Arion, betrayed by Morgan BWLCH on the eve of CHRONOLOGICAL. But for this, the Britons would have driven the Saxons back into the sea. If Prince Urien had been amongst them. Angus trailed off, and turned, as if his own thoughts were filling his mind and he needed a moment to himself. But Osrith had her own line of ideas now, and she went with the one uppermost in her memory. That is the point, is it not? She asked. Stabilize Strathclyde into an alliance, bring in Hywel and Flansinna. Or wait for the next Hugh Neil, who may be even more willing to fight with Constantine. That is what he means about subduing the Saxons and the Angles. Angus turned back and gave Osrith a grave look. Were that everything, Angus said, grimly. Dyfnwal seeks to ally with the Norse in the Western Isles. The king believes that he is trying to form enough of an army to mount an uprising. Angus looked at his arm as Osrith placed a hand on it. Will he listen? Osrith wondered. He is petulant, Angus replied, taking Osrith's hand off his arm and putting it into her lap. I wouldn't trust him, but Constantine has. He is Eochaid's son. To any Cymric, the Gaels are the invaders, pushing themselves into power, now claiming they rule over an entire land called Alba, with Strathclyde within it. Angus sighed. Henoled, the Old North, is the original kingdom for all Cymric, and though they have nothing now, not even their original homeland, all Britons have a collective memory of the land told in song and story to the next generation. Constantine clever, he is wise to let Dyfnwal still rule. But he is not a Morma. He is king. He bent the knee to Constantine. Angus got to his feet. And we were happy when it was just us and the Pitlanders to fight the Gaels. Hold that we did not do enough to convert them, and it took their own Comsil to do it. And who do the Picts hate? Osrith asked. Us, the Strathclydian Cymric, for they claim they were happy with their old gods, and that there was a feud that could not be won against the Angles because of Urien's death, although their king ordered it. Angus sighed. Both hate the Gaels, the black-haired strangers from oversea. Can he be talked to? Osrith returned to her original point. Angus fixed her with a stare and replied, perhaps. So, you are coming? I've organized supplies and food for us all, Osrith told him, though it had been Senedd, for most of it, not her. I intend to, but Angus held up a hand. At this, Osrith got up too, outraged at this man telling her what to do. But she fell silent when he looked down at her and smiled. Trust us, you are not to fight. Your child needs its mother, Angus said. Allow us to protect you. Constantine would. The door was flung open. On the other side of it, the king, who strode in towards Angus. I have considered that you, Constantine began, then saw Osrith and stopped. What is happening here? He demanded, and made to take Osrith by the arm. She pulled her arm back, so all that Constantine gripped was empty air. Osrith, he glared at her, and then at Angus. Then turned to Osrith again. What are you doing at this hour in the room of one of my Mormas? He made to grab her again. Old Constantine was back, Osrith thought, dully, petulant, demanding Constantine. I could not sleep. I went for a walk, saw Angus, remembered that I needed to speak to him about our venture, and, this time, Constantine caught her wrist. And where were you sleeping? Constantine demanded, as Osrith struggled. Where I always sleep at Dunnottar, with the mice at the back of the kitchens. She retorted, aware that Angus was looking at the both of them. You will come with me? Constantine demanded. Oidgmouth, a card, he said to Angus, still holding Osrith's wrist, and she grew angry when she could not get her arm away. And where exactly is it you want me to go? Osrith demanded, finally shaking Constantine off as they got outside the door. Constantine made another grab of her, then stopped, looking defeated, and stopped, aware perhaps that his Morma was watching them. Go back to the kitchen's rest, Constantine told her, sighing. But Osrith took a step towards him. Can Senedd come with us? She asked, bluntly. To Glashku? No. Constantine shook his head. He is my household guard. Trust me when I say you will be well cared for by my lords, he reasoned, aware that Angus was in the doorway staring at them both. Saying nothing to his Strathclydian lord, Constantine marched down the passageway. After a second or two, Osrith followed, down past the hall and onwards, following Constantine until he got to his own chamber. Osric looked at the door frame, remembering that she knew the place so well. Constantine pushed open the door, and Osric followed, not waiting to be invited. "Osric!" Constantine exclaimed, staring at her as if he had never seen her before that night, looking a little abashed, his tone lower, conciliatory. "It was wrong of me to not have invited you to the meeting this evening. Of course you want to know what your role is." "Something about my being the last of the Henogled?" she asked, as Constantine crossed behind her and pushed the door closed with enough force so the latch caught in place as it slammed. He crossed to a table on which a quill and parchments lay, and drew up a letter, which he pushed in Osric's direction. "You are to take this letter to Hywel, that he be reminded of the alliance that once existed between Welles and Alba," he said. "It is in Gaelish, so I want you to translate it for him, to demonstrate trust. Of course, he can get it translated himself, and he will find it is exactly as you say, so my words will bear heavier on him." Osric said nothing as she took it, looking only at the wax seal that had the letter C pressed upon it. "Your ancestor?" "Yes," Constantine said. "Your mother was of the line of the Henogled, back to Coalhen, the merry old soul, through Urien and beyond." He paced past her, and glanced back at the documents upon his table. It was a source of shame that Morgant BWLCH sent an assassin to kill Urien on the eve of battle. His men, out of their heads on mead in mourning, still fought, as did the men of Pitland, but were too disorganized to win against the Angles. Constantine shook his head. "There is always a fight, always fighting, killing, always a blood feud. I seek to put an end to it. Do you notice there is little like this in Aryan?" "Because of the High King," Constantine concluded. Osric said nothing, considering the events in Ireland. Having a High King and regional representatives did not seem to have served Flansinna too well, she thought, and there seemed to be a lot of bloodshed. However, it seemed to have been working under Findlaith, Domhnall, Ethnan Neil's father, whose funeral she had witnessed at Armagh. She remembered Tara as a great meeting place with so many peoples in one place at peace, networking, conducting business, enacting law and generally being content under the emperorship of the Ui Neil. It was no wonder that Constantine wanted that for Alba, for who would not want peace, when war was so endlessly draining, of men, money, energy. Nothing lasting could ever be developed under the threat or actuality of war. "And Hywel?" "Debubath is so far away from us." "Hywel feels threatened," Constantine replied back, simply. "Threatened?" She would have Constantine spell it out, though she knew exactly what he meant. Mercia was client to Wessex now because of Edward's power. Northumbria next. Wessex pressed to Hywel because of far shared old enemy, namely Mercia, and though Hywel claimed independence, Deheubarth he relied on Wessex for access into the Francia Sea and European trade, and Constantine said as much, while looking back to his parchments. "Can I trust the men?" Osric asked him. "I would be happier if Sainid was with me, or else I can go alone." Constantine gave her a look, narrowing his eyes, and then sat down on the bed Osric knew so well, patting a place beside him. Osric did not move, and he did not insist. "You are not strong enough to go alone," Constantine explained, "and for my plan to succeed, the game is planned far ahead. I would have sent you alone, but I did not count on ... child." He nodded his head to Osric. "I need Britons, all Britons, to be assured of my alliance, and theirs for me." Hywel Dda is a closed man. He can afford to be. No bias does he need, for he has mountains and valleys, as do I, particularly in our ancient lands, Dulriata, and many sea currents in the islands that only men who were brought up to them know their ways. Mountains and valleys mean most offensives fail. Your ancestor Ecgfrith found that out, at Nictonsmere. Osric nodded. She knew the stories of her Saxon ancestors from Bicca almost as well as she knew the stories her mother told her, when Jaitha had crept illicitly into Osric's room, of her old North ancestors, although she had thought them to be carefree, soothing bedtime stories then. So Hywel can afford to be choosy. Constantine continued. I need to send him something that will help change his mind. And what is that? Osrith asked. There is one thing that will turn Hyrule head is your ancestry, Ofrist. They are the origin of Cymric in Wales. If you bring my message, it will add weight to my cause. Osrith nodded, regretting the offer of a seat now, for she felt tired, and sleep was beginning to nag her eyes. But she would not let Constantine hump her, that night, or any, and sitting by him would encourage old habits between them. And your brother, at Bibbenberg, Constantine continued. Osrith's breath caught in her throat before she realized he meant Wicca. I need a bulwark to the Saxons. When their Ormers next meet, I plan to invite him to Dunnottar, make him an honorary Mormor, so to speak. If you want him, Osrith advised, you need to give him a good reason to join you. Like Elfric, I do not believe his heart is in a fight. He sees Bibbenberg as a home to return to after traveling overseas. Good. Constantine nodded, so presumably he will not object to Scots guarding the place. I am sure he will, Osrith said to herself, for the natural enemies of the Bernicians are the Scots. And I hope he does spend time away, Constantine added, with a chuckle. An absent lord makes claiming the disputed lands to the wall a much easier prospect. She could stand no longer, and Osrith paced to Constantine and belatedly took up the offer of rest. Constantine did not move, save to look at her shirt, given to her by Miralyn Mercia, loose over her trousers, outlining her huge sleeves which she had tied back. Why do you hate Uhtred so? Constantine asked. You left your home to go to find him. I did, Osrith agreed. I did find him. And ... we did not get on, Osrith replied, laconically. Oh? It was no good prevaricating, so Osrith pressed on.